Stop scrolling, because what happened at this airport gate will leave you speechless. Imagine standing in a crowded terminal, excited for your very first solo flight, and suddenly, in front of everyone, a flight attendant rips your first-class ticket in half. Not because it was fake, not because it was invalid, but because she assumed you didn't belong there. That's exactly what happened to a 14-year-old girl named Nia. Passengers whispered. People stared. No one stepped in. But here's what no one at that gate knew. The calm, quiet girl they underestimated wasn't just any passenger. And the phone call she made seconds later would shake the entire airline. Within minutes, managers were running. Screens were flashing. Executives were alerted. And when the truth came out about who her father really was, the same people who doubted her were left completely stunned. This isn't just a story about power. It's a story about assumptions, dignity, and a lesson that changed an entire company forever. Stay with me, because what happens next proves you should never judge someone by how they look. Shocking. The entire airport terminal went silent when a flight attendant suddenly ripped a young black girl's ticket in half, right in front of everyone. 14-year-old Nia clutched her small backpack tightly as pieces of her boarding pass floated to the shiny airport floor. The sound of tearing paper seemed louder than the airplanes outside. For a moment, everything felt frozen. She had been standing patiently at the gate, dressed in simple jeans and a hoodie, waiting to board her flight to New York. It was her first time flying alone. Her father had walked her through every step the night before. How to check the gate number, how to listen for announcements, how to stay calm if anything felt confusing. She had repeated his words in her head, like a checklist. The flight attendant, Miss Carter, had looked at her with visible doubt from the moment she stepped forward. "Sweetheart, this is a first-class ticket. You must be in the wrong line," she said, glancing quickly at Nia's clothes before scanning the torn halves of the pass. Nia shook her head politely. "No, ma'am. My dad booked it for me. He said to board with Group 1. A businessman standing nearby raised his eyebrows. A woman behind Nia whispered something under her breath. The murmurs grew louder, like a quiet wave rolling through the gate area. "MS." Carter let out an impatient sigh. "First class is for priority passengers. Are you traveling with your parents?" "No, ma'am. I'm meeting my dad in New York." "And where is he now?" "At work." The answer seemed to harden Miss Carter's expression. "I don't have time for games," she said sharply. "You can't just stand in this line because you want to." Before Nia could explain again, before she could reach into her bag for her ID, the ticket was torn cleanly in two. Gasps filled the gate. A man stepped forward slightly as if to speak, then stopped. No one wanted to get involved. Nia felt every pair of eyes on her. Her cheeks burned, and her throat tightened. She had never felt so small. For a split second, she thought about crying. The humiliation pressed heavily on her chest. But then she remembered her father's voice from the night before. "People may doubt you," he had said, "but never let someone else's assumptions control your behavior. Stay calm. Let your character speak for you." She slowly bent down and picked up the torn pieces of her ticket. Her hands trembled, but her voice remained steady. "My father told me to call him if there were any problems," she said quietly. "MS." Carter crossed her arms. "Go ahead." There was a hint of challenge in her tone, as if she expected the call to prove nothing. Nia pulled out her phone. For a brief moment, she hesitated. She didn't want to bother her father at work. He was always busy, always in meetings. But this was exactly why he had insisted she keep her phone charged. She dialed his number. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, superstar," he said warmly. "You boarding?" Nia swallowed the lump at her throat. "Dad, there's a problem." The smile in his voice disappeared instantly. "What happened?" Nia glanced at the torn ticket in her hand and at the growing crowd pretending not to stare. "They said my seat isn't real," she whispered, "and they ripped my ticket." There was a pause on the other end, not angry, not loud, just quiet. "What's the flight number?" he asked calmly. None of them at the gate had any idea that this calm question was about to change everything. With trembling fingers, Nia pulled out her phone and dialed her father. "Dad," she said softly, fighting back tears. "They won't let me board. The lady tore my ticket." On the other end, his warm tone instantly changed. Not to anger, not to panic, but to something far more controlled, focused silence. "What is the flight number?" he asked calmly. Nia read it from the display screen above the gate, her voice barely steady. "Stay right there," he replied. "Don't argue. Don't move. I'm handling it." The call ended. For a moment, nothing happened. The passengers resumed their quiet whispering. Miss Carter tapped impatiently on her keyboard, as if the situation were already finished. Then suddenly, the gate agent's computer made a sharp alert sound. A red notification banner appeared across the screen. The agent frowned. "That's strange." Another alert popped up. Then another. Within seconds, the system began refreshing automatically. Boarding was temporarily paused. Supervisors from nearby gates started walking quickly toward them, speaking into radios. One of them glanced directly at Nia before turning back to the desk with a serious expression. "MS." Carter blinked in confusion. "What's going on?" The gate agent didn't answer. She was staring at the screen, eyes wide. Then the airport manager arrived, almost out of breath, adjusting his tie as he approached. His usual relaxed demeanor was gone. He looked directly at Nia. "Is this the passenger?" he asked firmly. "Yes." Miss Carter responded defensively. She attempted to board first class, without proper documentation. "I handled it." The manager's eyes moved to the torn ticket pieces lying on the counter. He swallowed. "Her documentation," he said carefully, "was completely valid." A silence fell over the desk area. "MS." Carter straightened. "That's not possible. The system didn't." "The system confirms it." The manager interrupted quietly. Behind them, the large digital departure screens in the terminal flickered briefly. It was subtle, but noticeable enough for nearby passengers to glance up. More staff members began standing straighter, adjusting their uniforms. Radios buzzed nonstop. A call came directly to the gate phone. The manager answered quickly, his posture shifting the moment he heard the voice on the other end. "Yes, sir. Yes, she's here. I understand." He hung up slowly. "MS." Carter's confidence began to fade. "What is happening?" she asked, her voice no longer sharp. The manager stepped closer to her, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You need to be very careful about what you say next." Her brows furrowed. "Why?" He leaned in and whispered something that drained every bit of color from her face. Across the terminal, 2 black SUVs had just pulled up to the VIP entrance. Nia stood quietly, holding her backpack straps, unaware of the full weight of what was unfolding. She didn't feel powerful. She didn't feel important. She just wanted to board her flight with dignity. But the entire airline headquarters had already been alerted, because Nia's father wasn't just any passenger calling to complain. He wasn't just a frequent flyer. He was the majority owner of the airline. And when his daughter said she had been publicly embarrassed and denied boarding, without cause, the matter moved from a simple gate dispute to a top-level emergency. MS. Carter's hands began to tremble slightly. Passengers who had been whispering earlier now stood in stunned silence. Within minutes, security personnel repositioned themselves near the entrance. Senior executives were dialing in. The atmosphere had shifted completely. What had started as a torn piece of paper was now a moment that would ripple through the entire company. And everyone at Gate 14 was about to witness just how quickly assumptions can turn into consequences. 15 minutes later, black SUVs pulled up outside the terminal entrance. Their glossy doors opened in perfect coordination, and security personnel immediately straightened, stepping aside with quiet urgency. Inside the terminal, passengers pressed against the tall glass windows, curiosity spreading like wildfire. "Who is that?" someone whispered. A tall, well-dressed man stepped through the sliding doors. His suit was simple but perfectly tailored. His posture was relaxed, yet commanding. He wasn't surrounded by noise or chaos. He wasn't shouting orders, but the air seemed to shift around him. Authority doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it walks in calmly. Airport executives hurried to meet him, but he didn't stop. He moved with steady purpose, eyes focused ahead, toward Gate 14. Nia saw him before anyone else. Her shoulders, tense for the past 20 minutes, finally relaxed. "Dad," she breathed. He gave her a soft, reassuring smile, the same smile he used when teaching her how to ride a bike. the same one he used before big school presentations. It wasn't dramatic. It was grounding. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder, silently asking, "Are you okay?" She nodded. Only then did he turn toward the staff at the counter. "I understand there was an issue with my daughter's ticket," he said evenly. His voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. "Ms." Carter cleared her throat, attempting to regain composure. "Sir, there must have been some confusion. She was standing in the first-class line, and I believed." He lifted his hand politely, stopping her mid-sentence. "Confusion," he said calmly, "is asking a question. Confusion is verifying information. Tearing a child's ticket without verification is a decision." The words landed heavily. The terminal fell completely silent. Even the distant boarding announcements seemed quieter. He reached down and carefully picked up the torn pieces of the boarding pass from the counter. He aligned the halves gently, as if restoring something that should never have been broken. "My daughter earned that seat," he continued. "Not because of me, not because of my title, but because she is a paying passenger who deserves dignity." Several passengers nodded quietly. One woman folded her arms, looking embarrassed for having doubted Nia earlier. The father's expression remained composed, but his eyes were firm. He turned toward the airport manager. "Is this how we treat young travelers?" he asked. "Is this how we treat people based on appearance?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. The manager lowered his head. "No, sir." "Is this how your staff is trained to handle uncertainty?" he asked again. "No, sir," the manager repeated, his voice smaller now. The father looked back at Miss Carter. She avoided eye contact, her earlier confidence completely gone. "I want you to understand something," he said gently but clearly. "Leadership is not about power. It is about responsibility. Every uniform worn in this company represents trust." He gestured subtly toward Nia. "She trusted you." Those 3 words struck harder than anger ever could. Passengers who had been silent now watched with deeper understanding. This wasn't just about a torn ticket anymore. It was about respect. It was about assumptions made too quickly. Nia stood quietly beside her father, not hiding, not shrinking. For the first time since the incident began, the balance of the moment had shifted, and everyone at Gate 14 knew they were witnessing more than a confrontation. They were witnessing a lesson. Instead of yelling or demanding immediate punishment, Nia's father surprised everyone. The tension in the terminal was thick. Many expected raised voices, threats, or immediate termination. After all, he had the authority to make that happen with a single sentence. But he didn't. Instead, he turned back to Miss Carter, his expression steady and thoughtful. "Tell me," he said calmly, "why did you assume she didn't belong in first class?" The question wasn't aggressive. It wasn't loud, but it was direct. "Ms." Carter opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her eyes flickered toward the passengers, who had witnessed everything. The whispers from earlier now felt heavier, accusatory. I thought there was a mistake," she said finally, her voice no longer sharp or defensive. But everyone standing there understood the deeper meaning. This wasn't about a technical error. It wasn't about a scanner malfunction or a system glitch. It was about assumptions. It was about looking at a young black girl in simple clothes and deciding she didn't fit the image of first class. Nia's father nodded slowly. "Mistakes happen," he said. "We are all human, but respect should never be optional." His words were calm, but they carried weight. Not just for Miss Carter, for everyone watching. He then turned to Nia, softening instantly. "Baby," he said gently, "what do you think should happen?" The question stunned the crowd. He wasn't just defending her. He was giving her a voice. The entire terminal seemed to lean in at once. Even the boarding announcements in the background felt distant. Nia wiped the last trace of tears from her cheeks. Her hands were steady now. The embarrassment she had felt earlier had transformed into quiet strength. She thought for a moment before speaking. "I don't want anyone fired," she said clearly. "I just don't want this to happen to someone else." The simplicity of her answer struck deeper than anger ever could. A few passengers exchanged looks of admiration. One man quietly nodded. A woman near the back wiped her eye. Her father's face lit up with pride. "That," he said, placing a hand gently on her shoulder, "is leadership." Leadership wasn't revenge. It wasn't humiliation. It was accountability with purpose. He turned toward the airport manager, his tone now professional and decisive. Starting today, I want a full review of customer service training across this airline. Every employee, from gate agents to senior staff, will complete bias awareness education. No exceptions. The manager straightened immediately. Yes, sir. We'll begin the process today. I also want a new verification protocol, he continued. No ticket is ever destroyed without supervisor confirmation. Ever. Yes, sir. MS. Carter stood quietly, her earlier confidence replaced with visible regret. The reality of the moment settled over her. This wasn't just a policy issue. It was personal growth. She looked at Nia, her eyes softening. I'm sorry, she said sincerely. I should have handled that differently. There was no sarcasm now, no pride, just honesty. Nia met her gaze. For a second, the entire terminal waited to see how she would respond. I forgive you, Nia said gently. And in that moment, something shifted. The tension that had gripped the gate slowly dissolved. Shoulders relaxed. The whispering stopped. The atmosphere no longer felt heavy. It felt reflective. This was no longer a scene of embarrassment. It had become a moment of transformation. Passengers who had once doubted Nia now saw her clearly, not as a child out of place, but as a young leader who chose dignity over anger. And just like that, Gate 14 became quieter, calmer, and wiser than it had been an hour before. A new boarding pass was printed immediately, the crisp paper sliding out of the machine with a quiet hum. This time, there was no hesitation, no suspicious glance. The gate agent stepped out from behind the counter and walked around to stand beside Nia. Right this way, she said respectfully. The difference in tone was unmistakable. But something else had changed too. Passengers who had once whispered behind their hands were now watching openly. A few began clapping softly. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just gentle applause filled with recognition. Others offered warm smiles as Nia passed by. The same businessman who had raised his eyebrow earlier gave her a small nod of respect. A woman near the window mouthed, "You handled that beautifully." Nia felt a shift. The embarrassment she had carried earlier was gone. In its place stood quiet confidence. As she walked down the jet bridge beside her father, the noise of the terminal fading behind them, he leaned down slightly. "Your calmness changed more than you know," he said softly. Nia looked up at him. "You always told me to stay strong." He smiled. "Strength isn't about raising your voice. It's about controlling it." The steady hum of the aircraft engines grew louder as they approached the plane door. The flight crew stood waiting. This time, there were no doubtful expressions, only professionalism and a hint of admiration. "Welcome aboard," the lead flight attendant said warmly, making direct eye contact with Nia. Even the cabin crew seemed a little more aware, a little more intentional in their posture. Word had already traveled quickly. Nia stepped into first class, not as someone proving a point, not as someone seeking validation, but as a young girl who had shown grace under pressure. She placed her backpack gently in the overhead bin and slid into her seat by the window. The leather felt cool beneath her hands. Outside, the runway lights shimmered in the early evening glow. Her father took the seat beside her, not saying much. He didn't need to. The lesson had already spoken for itself. Back at the gate, Miss Carter remained still for a moment after the boarding door closed. The crowd had dispersed, but the memory lingered. She replayed the scene in her mind, the assumption, the torn ticket, the quiet dignity in Nia's response. She realized something important that day. Authority without awareness can cause harm, and professionalism without empathy is incomplete. The lesson would stay with her far longer than any company memo ever could. Moments later, the aircraft pushed back from the gate. The plane lifted smoothly into the sky, climbing higher above the city lights. That flight took off on time. But what truly soared that day wasn't just an airplane. It was awareness. It was accountability. It was the reminder that respect should never depend on appearance, clothing, age, or assumptions. In a world quick to judge, Nia had chosen composure. In a moment that could have turned angry, she chose growth. And everyone who witnessed it left changed in some way, whether they admitted it or not, because you never truly know someone's story by looking at them. You never know their journey. You never know who they are, or whose child they might be. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that inspire courage, teach empathy, and remind us all that true strength begins with respect.